Three cops laughed when a black man in a hoodie walked into the courtroom. They thought he was just another thug. Until the judge stood up and called him director. Their faces dropped. Why? Because the man they mocked wasn't a suspect. He was the FBI director, and he was there to bring them to justice. What happened next left the entire courtroom in shock. Everyone turned their heads when he walked into the courtroom. He didn't strut. He didn't rush. He walked slow, like someone who had no reason to impress anyone. A baggy gray hoodie hung over his head, slightly shadowing his face. His jeans were worn out, his sneakers scuffed like they'd been through too many miles. Hands in his pockets. No briefcase. No badge. No entourage. You could almost hear the silent judgment swirling through the room. Near the front, 3 uniformed officers, white, smug, and loud enough not to care, shared a private laugh. Looks like someone wandered in from the wrong side. "Of town," one snorted, elbowing his buddy. "Bet he's here for a cousin's trial," another added with a smirk. "Or maybe his own." They leaned back in their chairs, watching the man move through the rows like a ghost nobody invited. Their laughter wasn't just disrespect. It was poisoned with assumptions, the kind you learn over years of unchecked authority and quiet racism. They didn't even try to whisper. To them, he was just another black man in a hoodie. Probably. Late for court, probably on the wrong side of the law, but what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this so-called thug was the most powerful person in the room. Not the judge, not the prosecutors, not even the chief of police who sat stiffly in the second row. He was the reason they were all here. The man. In the hoodie was Director Xavier Banks, head of the FBI. And this courtroom wasn't just another trial. This was a setup, his setup. He had orchestrated every detail, the public hearing, the location, the audience, even the judge. Because today wasn't about evidence. It was about exposure. And the 3 laughing cops in the front row, they were the ones on trial. But they didn't know that yet. Director Banks took a seat in the back row, folded his arms, and scanned the room. His eyes were calm, but underneath the surface, a storm brewed. Years of watching people like those officers abuse their power and walk away clean. Years of staying quiet, watching from the top, always watching. He hadn't planned on showing up like this. But then again, neither had they planned on getting caught. The laughter in the courtroom slowly died as the judge entered. People rose. Director Banks stayed seated, his hoodie still up. The officers didn't even notice him. Why would they? To them, he wasn't anyone. Just another face. Just another nobody. Until the judge glanced at the back row and said the words that made the entire courtroom freeze. "Director Xavier Banks, the floor is yours." The cops' smirks disappeared like smoke. One officer blinked. Another sat up straight, confused. "Director who?" one whispered. Then the man in the hoodie stood, and for the first time, everyone really looked at him. Slowly, he pulled down the hood. The scuffed sneakers were still there. The baggy hoodie hadn't changed, but now they saw the face of the man who had more clearance than the judge, more rank than any officer in the room, and more power than they could ever imagine. He stepped forward, and with every step, their world cracked a little more. Let's rewind. 1 week before that courtroom moment, a black man in a sharp charcoal gray suit stepped out of a federal building and walked toward his parked vehicle. A sleek, black Cadillac CT6 with tinted windows and federal plates. As he opened the door, he noticed a patrol car creeping up the street. Then another. Within seconds, red and blue lights lit up the sidewalk. 2 cruisers boxed him in. 3 white officers jumped out. No sirens, no warning, just aggressive footsteps and hands already hovering over their holsters. "Sir, do you own this vehicle?" one asked sharply, not even trying to hide his suspicion. "License and registration," barked another before the man could respond. The suited man didn't flinch. Calmly, he said, "Of course," reaching into my inner pocket, slowly. But soon as his hand moved, they pounced, tackled, slammed, pinned. He hit the pavement hard, cheeks scraping the cold concrete, his hands twisted behind his back. "Stop resisting!" one shouted, even though the man wasn't moving. "Where'd you steal this car from, huh?" Another sneered. "Boy!" they called him. "Thief!" Suspect. But none of it was true, and one person standing across the street knew it. a bystander, had started filming with their phone, capturing the entire thing, the struggle, the shouts, the insults, and finally, the silence. Because the man never yelled, never fought back. He just stared at the ground, breathing slow, waiting. When they searched him, they found the ID. They read it, then read it again, and their faces changed. Not because they realized he was innocent, but because they realized they had messed up, badly. The name on the badge? Director Xavier Banks, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They froze. "Wait, are you really FBI?" one officer stammered, suddenly sweating. But Banks didn't answer. He looked them in the eyes and said only 4 words. "Finish what you started." So they did. Still handcuffed him, still took him in, still fingerprinted him, processed him, and called it routine procedure. Even as whispers began to spread across the precinct, even as higher-ups scrambled for explanations. But Director Banks, he said nothing. No calls, no lawyers, no threats. He let it happen, because he had a bigger plan. He could have shut it down in seconds. He could have made one phone call and ended their careers on the spot. But he didn't want quick revenge. He wanted accountability, public, unfiltered, unavoidable. He knew this wasn't just about him. This was about every black man who had ever been profiled, harassed, or tackled without cause. This was about a system built on assumptions and protected by silence. So he stayed silent, but not because he was weak. He was preparing to speak where it mattered most, in a courtroom, on the record, with cameras rolling. He knew the power of patience. He knew the power of truth. And more than anything, he knew that exposing corruption is a lot louder when the guilty think they're still in control. And so, for the next week, he let the officers live their lives like nothing happened until the summons arrived. A courtroom hearing, federal attention, unexplained urgency. They had no idea who called for it. They just knew they had to be there, and they came in laughing. But when Banks walked into that courtroom 7 days later, in a hoodie, not a suit, he wasn't there to forgive. He was there to finish what they started. His video went viral. Within 48 hours, it was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, national news. Black man in a suit tackled outside a government building, held down, called boy. Arrested without reason. Millions watched. Millions were outraged. Protests erupted in cities across the country. Marches, chants, hashtags. Justice for the director. But still, the local department released a cold, rehearsed statement. The incident is under internal review. At this time, no wrongdoing has been determined. Behind those hollow words, 3 officers slept easy, convinced they'd walk away untouched. Again. But while they relaxed behind their badges, Director Xavier Banks was already moving. He ordered a federal hearing, a public one. No secrets, no settlements, no behind-the-scenes apologies. He picked the courtroom himself. Their courtroom. The one where those 3 officers had testified for years, laughing in the hallways, trading smirks with the bailiff, and acting like they owned the place. He wanted them comfortable. He wanted them cocky. He wanted the fall to feel real. Director Banks told no one of his plan. No cameras followed him. No agents flanked him. He showed up in silence, hoodie over his head, hands in his pockets, just like the day they tackled him. The courtroom filled quickly. Press, lawyers, local officials, and in walked the 3 officers, laughing as always. "Another thug wants to cry racism," one scoffed. "Can't wait to watch this clown fold on the stand," another said. They didn't even recognize him, even as he stood to speak, even as he walked past them, calm and quiet. Then the judge said it. "Director Xavier Banks, you have the floor." Silence. Total silence. "Wait, what did he just say?" one officer whispered. Another turned pale. The third dropped his pen. Every eye in the room snapped toward the man, in the hoodie. Director Banks moved slowly to the podium. Then he pulled back the hood. Gone was the streetwear image they mocked. Underneath was a navy blue suit, flawless. Gold FBI pin gleamed on his lapel. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to yell. His presence was thunder. And then he spoke. "When I was face down on the concrete, I wasn't the FBI director. I was just another black man you thought. Had no power." He turned to face them directly. his gaze sharp, unflinching. But today I stand before you with every resource of the federal government behind me, and we are done being silent. A collective gasp filled the room. One juror covered their mouth. A reporter scribbled frantically. Then, with a quiet click, Director Banks turned to the screen beside him and played the video. The arrest, the shouts, the slurs, the silence. The officers couldn't look away. When the footage ended, Banks let the weight hang in the air. Then he said, "This is not just misconduct, this is abuse, racial profiling, a violation of federal rights, and it ends now." The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. People rose to their feet. Justice didn't whisper that day. It roared. The footage ended. And the room was still. Not quiet. Still. Like the air had thickened, like everyone was holding their breath. The officers sat frozen, faces flushed, mouths dry. For the first time in their careers, they weren't in control. They weren't being protected by silence or swept under the rug. They were exposed. The judge cleared her throat and looked over the courtroom. After reviewing the evidence presented, including video documentation, and official FBI reports, this court finds probable cause to proceed with federal charges. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Officers Brent Holloway, Jason Kern, and Luke Dorsey, you are hereby suspended without pay, pending full federal investigation. You are also being referred to the Department of Justice for civil rights violations. One officer buried his face in his hands. Another tried to speak, but no words came out. And Director Banks? He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood there, quiet, steady, powerful. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about reckoning." Then he turned toward the press, his voice carrying beyond the courtroom. "Let this be a message, not just to these 3 officers, but to every institution that lets behavior like this continue. We're watching now, we're listening, and we will not look away." Outside, reporters raced to broadcast the verdict. Within minutes, the story hit every major network. FBI director reveals identity in court, exposes officers who arrested him without cause. Protests turned to celebrations. Marches became movements. New policies were drafted, real ones. In that single moment, power shifted, not because one man had a badge, but because he used it to shine light where others stayed in shadows. Director Banks left the courtroom as quietly as he came. No motorcade, no fanfare, just the echo of truth trailing behind him. As for the officers, they never laughed in a courtroom again. The 3 officers were suspended by the end of that day. Federal charges followed. This time, there was no cover-up. No vague department statement, no PR spin. The police department launched a full investigation, with the FBI now watching. Closely, and outside that courtroom, cameras swarmed. Director Xavier Banks stepped forward, not with anger, but with clarity. He looked into the lens, straight into the eyes of America, and said, "When you judge a man by his hoodie instead of his heart, you fail as a public servant. Wore that hoodie because I wanted to be seen as one of the millions who are judged, profiled, and mistreated every single day. If my title made you respect me, then you never understood the job to begin with." That clip, just 47 seconds long, went viral. 1,000,000 views in a week. It was replayed on the news, shared by students, reposted by celebrities, even praised by officers from other states who were ready for change. Protest signs turned into posters of his quote. Classrooms played it during civic lessons. Even some police academies added it to their ethics training, because Director Banks hadn't just stood up for himself, he stood up for everyone who couldn't. He reminded America of something powerful. Justice isn't about uniforms, badges, or titles. It's about truth, and truth doesn't need a suit to be heard. That day didn't just change the lives of 3 arrogant officers. It changed how a courtroom looked at a hoodie, how a city looked at its own reflection, and how a nation remembered what justice is supposed to be. And from that day forward, no one in that courtroom ever laughed at a so-called thug again. Because sometimes the man you dismiss is the one who holds your future in his hands. If you love stories where the underestimated rise and justice hits hard, don't just watch. Join the VIP fam. Hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We drop moments that change everything. Only the real ones subscribe. Are you one of them?